The thin, laminated sheet, tucked under my truck's windshield wiper, was the first tremor of an earthquake I didn't know was coming. It was a Tuesday afternoon. The sky a brilliant, cloudless blue that made the manicured lawns of Oakwood Preserve look like a page from a catalog. I had just gotten home, my hands still smelling of grease and solvent. A good day's work behind me. The notice was from the Architectural Control Committee, or ACC. It was polite, almost cheerful, with its cursive font and clip-art oak leaf logo. Courtesy notice. Re-commercial vehicle, Ford F-250, white location driveway, 1214 Rosewood Lane. Dear resident, this is a friendly reminder that pursuant to the Oakwood Preserve Covenants, Conditions and Restrictions CC&Rs, Article 8, Section 8.4 commercial vehicles are not permitted to be parked in view of the street overnight. Please ensure the vehicle is stored in a garage or otherwise removed from public view. Thank you for your cooperation in keeping Oakwood Preserve beautiful. I read it twice, then crumpled it into a ball and tossed it onto the passenger seat. A mistake. My truck, a well-maintained F-250, was my personal vehicle. Yes, it had a small, discreet logo for Walker's Auto Repair on the door, a name and a phone number in simple black vinyl. But it wasn't a dump truck or a panel van with ladders bolted to the roof. It was parked in my driveway, on my property, where it had been parked nearly every day for the 5 years we'd lived here. I dismissed it as an overzealous new committee member, someone who hadn't yet learned the difference between a rule and a reason. I would ignore it, and it would go away. That was my first mistake. My name is Daniel Walker. I fix things. My garage is my sanctuary, a place where logic prevails, and every problem has a solution if you have the right tool and the patience to find it. My wife, Heather, fixes things too, but on a grander scale. 3 months ago, she was appointed the new county sheriff. It was an interim appointment to fill a vacancy, quiet and procedural, just the way she liked it. We kept it low profile, no yard signs, no announcements in the HOA newsletter. In her line of work, anonymity at home isn't just a preference, it's a layer of security. Our life in Oakwood Preserve was built on that principle: quiet, orderly, and private. We paid our dues, mowed our lawn, and brought our trash cans in on time. We were good neighbors. We thought that was enough. We had, of course, heard the stories about the HOA board president, Karen Lawson. She was a neighborhood legend, a woman who seemed to patrol the streets in her golf cart with a ruler and a copy of the governing documents, searching for infractions. She was known for her weaponized politeness, her emails that dripped with passive aggression, and her unshakable belief that she was the sole guardian of our collective property values. Until now, our interactions had been limited to a pleasant wave as she zipped past. I assumed her reign of terror was exaggerated, the kind of tall tale people tell about overbearing HOAs. That was my second mistake. The crumpled notice sat on my truck's passenger seat for a week. Forgotten. The following Wednesday, the mail carrier, a cheerful woman named Brenda, who always had a treat for our dog, handed me a certified letter. It required a signature. My stomach tightened. Nothing good ever arrives via certified mail. I sat at the kitchen table and slit the envelope open with a butter knife. The letterhead was from Oakwood Preserve HOA Management, a third-party company that handled the board's administrative tasks. The tone was no longer friendly. Formal notice of violation. Date October 11th, 2023. Certified mail. 7022, 1670, 001, 4589, 3312. Property 1214, Rosewood Lane, Oakwood. VA owner of record, Daniel and Heather Walker. This letter serves as a formal notice of a continuing violation of the covenants, conditions and restrictions (CC&Rs) governing the Oakwood Preserve community. Specifically, you are in violation of Article 8, Section 8.4.2, Nuisances and Commercial Activity. No commercial vehicles, including but not limited to any vehicle with visible lettering, logos, or equipment related to a commercial enterprise, shall be parked or stored on any lot where it is visible from the street or any common area. A courtesy notice regarding this violation was issued on October 3, 2023, and the violation has not been cured. As per the board's established fine policy, a fine of $100 has been levied against your account. This fine will recur daily until the violation is resolved. You have the right to contest this violation and fine by requesting a hearing before the Board of Directors. Your request for a hearing must be submitted in writing to the management company within 10 days of the date of this notice. Failure to do so will be considered an admission of the violation, and the fines will stand. Sincerely, Karen Lawson, President, Oakwood Preserve, HOA Board of Directors. The words on the page felt cold and heavy. $100 a day. This wasn't a mistake anymore. This was an attack. The clock was ticking. That evening, I laid the letter on the kitchen island for Heather to see. She read it, her expression unreadable, a skill she had perfected over 15 years in law enforcement. $100 a day, I said, the anger simmering in my voice. For parking my own truck in my own driveway. Can she even do that? Heather tapped the letter. It depends on the governing documents. The CC&Rs are a legally binding contract we agreed to when we bought the house. She went to the bookshelf in the living room and returned with a thick, 3-ring binder labeled Oakwood Preserve Governing Documents. It had been sitting there, untouched, since the day we closed on the house. For the next 2 hours, we sat at the table and read. It was like trying to read a foreign language, a dense fog of legalese and circular definitions. But we found it, Article 8, Section 8.4.2. The wording was exactly as quoted in the letter. It was broad, vague, and ridiculously restrictive. I felt a surge of frustration. How could we have signed this? But my driveway is my property, I argued. How can they tell me what I can park on my own land? That's the question, Heather said, her finger tracing the edge of the page. Their authority is absolute on the common areas, the pool, the clubhouse, the green spaces, on private lots. It's limited to what the CC&Rs explicitly grant them power to regulate. Her whole case rests on the phrase, in view of the street. We need to know where our property line officially ends and the common area begins. I highlighted the clause for 8.4.2 with a yellow marker, the ambiguous words glowing under the kitchen light. It was the first piece of a puzzle I was just beginning to understand. So, what do we do? I asked. We follow the process, Heather said calmly. You write a polite, formal letter requesting a hearing. We don't make accusations. We don't get emotional. We state our case, present our interpretation of the rules, and treat them with respect. We give them a chance to be reasonable. She was right. Of course. My instinct was to march over to Karen's house and have it out, to treat this like a disagreement between two people. But it wasn't. It was a legal dispute. And we had to play by the rules, even if they were Karen's. I spent the next hour drafting a letter, Heather reviewing it to strip out any hint of my anger, leaving only the cool, detached language of procedure. I sent it via certified mail the next morning, a receipt for a battle I had officially joined. The hearing was held 2 weeks later in the sterile, beige meeting room of the community clubhouse. The air was thick with the smell of stale coffee and self-importance. Karen Lawson sat at the center of a long folding table, flanked by the other two board members, a man named Bob, who nodded at everything she said, and a woman named Carol, who seemed terrified to make eye contact with anyone. A representative from the management company sat at the end, taking minutes. I had come prepared. I had photographs of my truck from every angle, showing the modest size of the logo. I had printouts of the county ordinance defining a commercial vehicle, which my F-250 did not meet. I had a calm, 3-minute speech rehearsed. Karen called the hearing to order with a rap of her pen on the table. "Mr. Walker, thank you for coming. The board has reviewed your letter. Please state your case." Her smile was a thin, bloodless line. I stood and laid out my points clearly and respectfully. I explained that the truck was my personal vehicle, registered to me, not my business. I argued that the small logo was for identification and advertising, not the primary use of the vehicle, and that the county didn't classify it as commercial. When I finished, Karen didn't address any of my points. She simply opened her own binder to a marked page. "Mr. Walker, the county's definition is irrelevant. The association's governing documents provide their own definition. Section 8.4.2 is perfectly clear. Any vehicle with visible lettering, logos, or equipment related to a commercial enterprise. Your truck has a logo. It is therefore in violation. The board's interpretation is that this rule is essential for maintaining the uniform, residential character of our community." "But the rule is unreasonable," I countered, trying to keep my voice even. It's a vague clause being selectively enforced. Karen's smile tightened. "The board disagrees. We have a duty to uphold the CC&Rs as written. Is there anything else?" I felt a surge of impotent rage. This wasn't a hearing. It was a formality. The verdict had been decided before I even walked in the door. Bob and Carol stared blankly at the table. "Yes," I said. "My last attempt at reason. This rule gives the board arbitrary power. Where does it end? Does a bumper sticker for a local pizza place make a car, a commercial vehicle? Does a license plate frame from a dealership?" Karen's eyes glittered. "That would be for the board to decide, on a case-by-case basis. Thank you for your time. Mr. Walker, we will mail you our decision." The letter arrived 3 days later. It was one paragraph. The board had voted unanimously to uphold the violation and the fines. The total was now up to $1,900. I felt sick. It wasn't about the money anymore. It was the crushing injustice of it. The feeling of being trapped in a system where logic and reason had no currency. That night, as I stared at the growing bill, I knew Heather's initial strategy of polite compliance had failed. Karen wasn't reasonable. She didn't want compliance. She wanted submission. And I was not going to give it to her. The fight was no longer about the truck. It was about her abuse of power. And I was going to take it apart, piece by piece, following the rules she thought were her exclusive weapons. My first move was to go on the offensive. Procedurally, Heather had coached me on the state statutes that govern homeowners associations. They weren't powerful, but they granted homeowners specific rights. Chief among them, the right to inspect the association's records. I drafted a new letter to the management company, formally requesting copies of all board meeting minutes, financial statements, and active vendor contracts for the past 2 years. It was a broad request, designed to be a bureaucratic headache, a signal that I wasn't going away. While I waited, I started talking to my neighbors. I began with Mr. Patel, a kind, soft-spoken man who ran a small IT consulting business from his home. I'd seen violation notices on his door before. I found him in his front yard, meticulously trimming his hedges. Mr. Patel, I began. I'm Daniel Walker from down the street. I was wondering if you've had any issues with the HOA lately. His friendly expression faded. He glanced nervously toward the street, as if Karen's golf cart might materialize at any moment. It is best not to make trouble. Mr. Walker, he said in a low voice. I pressed gently. She's fining me $100 a day over my truck. I'm fighting it. He sighed, a sound of weary resignation. She has fined me over $3,000 this year. My home office, she says, violates the commercial activity rule, even though I have no clients here. The sign for my business, the one the county requires me to have for my license, is aesthetically displeasing. The fines, they are very difficult for my family. He was afraid. That was the core of her power. She isolated her targets, bleeding them dry with fines until they either gave up and paid or sold their homes. My next stop was 3 doors down. Arthur Vance was a retired man who kept to himself. I'd heard he used to be a forensic accountant. I found him on his porch, reading the Wall Street Journal. I explained my situation and my records request. His eyes, sharp and intelligent behind thick glasses, lit up with interest. A records request. Good. That's the right first move. Most people just yell. You're using the proper channels. He folded his newspaper. Let me know what they send you. Daniel. I'd be curious to see their books. I was the HOA treasurer for a year, back before Karen was elected president. I resigned. He left the reason hanging in the air. A week later, a thick manila envelope arrived. It contained the records I'd requested, but as I spread them out on my dining room table, my heart sank. The meeting minutes were heavily redacted, entire paragraphs, especially those under the heading Vendor Contract Approvals, were blacked out with a thick marker. The financial statements were summaries, lacking the detailed line items that would show where the money was actually going. It was a masterclass in malicious compliance. They had fulfilled their legal obligation to provide the documents, but they had hidden everything of value. The suspicious redactions were a glaring red flag, a clue pointing directly toward a secret. Karen escalated. New notices appeared on my door. One for a patch of clover in my lawn, another for a small chip in the paint on my mailbox post. Each came with a fresh $50 fine. It was a war of 1,000 paper cuts, designed to wear me down. But she had made a critical error by redacting the vendor contracts. She had told me exactly where to look. I called Arthur. They blacked out everything related to vendor payments. I told him over the phone. Of course. They did, he said, a grim satisfaction in his voice. That's where the bodies are buried. But they had to give you the approved annual budget. Right. Yes, it's here. A single page. Look for the big line items. Landscaping, pool maintenance, insurance. What's the landscaping budget for the year? I scanned the document. $120,000. There was a sharp intake of breath on the other end of the line. 120. For this neighborhood. That's absurd. When I was treasurer, it was 40,000, and our landscaping was immaculate. Find out who has that contract. Daniel, that's your thread. Pull on it. The problem was, the contract itself was one of the redacted documents, but the budget gave me another clue, a line item for property management fees paid to a company called Apex Community Management. They were the ones who sent the letters. A quick online search gave me their address. The next morning, I drove to a small, generic office park. I told the receptionist I was an Oakwood Preserve homeowner and wanted a copy of the current landscaping contract, as was my right under state law. The receptionist, a young woman who looked bored, disappeared into a back office. She returned a few minutes later with the office manager, a severe-looking woman who eyed me with suspicion. "We have already provided all the required documents to you, Mr. Walker," she said. "You provided redacted documents," I replied calmly. "State law requires you to provide access to the full record. I am exercising that right now. I'm happy to wait." It was a bluff. I wasn't sure if I could legally compel them on the spot, but she didn't know that either. She stared at me for a long moment, then turned and walked away. 20 minutes later, she returned and slapped a document on the counter. $5 for the copy. I paid her and walked out with the unredacted contract, my heart hammering in my chest. I didn't even wait to get home. I sat in my truck in the parking lot and read it. The contract was for $10,000 a month, paid to a company called Lawson Landscape and Design. The signature on behalf of the company was clear, Martin Lawson. A quick search of public records confirmed it. Martin Lawson was Karen's brother-in-law. It all clicked into place. The inflated budget, the redacted minutes, Arthur's sudden resignation. This wasn't just about a power-hungry woman enforcing petty rules. This was a deliberate, calculated scheme. Karen was using our HOA dues to enrich her own family, billing the community at 3 times the market rate and, I was willing to bet, getting a hefty kickback for her trouble. My fight over a parking spot had just uncovered a conspiracy. The fines, the harassment, the selective enforcement, it was all a smokescreen. The real purpose of her iron-fisted rule was to intimidate residents into silence, to keep anyone from looking too closely at the books, where the real crime was hiding in plain sight. The game had changed. I now had a motive that went far beyond power. I had evidence of potential fraud. Word of my investigation must have gotten back to Karen. Perhaps the management company called her the moment I left their office. Her retaliation was swift, silent, and far more dangerous than a violation notice. 10 days later, another certified letter arrived. This one wasn't from the HOA. It was from their attorneys. Notice of intent to file lien. It stated that my unpaid fines and associated legal fees now totaled $4,250. If the amount was not paid in full within 30 days, the association would file a lien against our property. I handed the letter to Heather, my hands shaking slightly. A lien. That was the nuclear option in an HOA dispute. It was a legal claim against our house, a black mark on our credit, a threat that could, if left unresolved, eventually lead to foreclosure. This was no longer a squabble over rules. It was a direct threat to our home, our financial stability, our life. "This is her endgame," Heather said, her voice grim. She put her arm around me. "She's trying to scare us into dropping this before we find anything else." The pressure was immense. We had a mortgage. We had plans for the future. A lien could jeopardize all of it. For a moment, I considered just paying the fine. It would be easier. We could afford it. But then I thought of Mr. Patel. His shoulders slumped in defeat. And Arthur, who had resigned rather than be a part of the corruption. If I backed down now, she would be free to continue bleeding them. And countless others. Dry. "No," I said, the words solid and firm. "I'm not paying her a dime. I'm going to end this." My next step was concrete. Literally. The entire dispute over my truck hinged on Karen's claim that my driveway was in view of the street. A phrase that implied it was part of some common visual space she controlled. I needed to prove, definitively, that my driveway was mine and mine alone. The next morning, I drove to the county recorder's office, a stately old building downtown filled with the quiet rustle of paper. I requested the official plat map for the Oakwood Preserve subdivision, Lot 118. The clerk returned with a large, rolled-up blueprint. I spread it out on a massive wooden table, and there it was, in crisp, undeniable black and white. Lot 118 was a perfect rectangle. The property lines were clearly marked, extending all the way to the curb. My driveway was not an easement. It was not a common area. It was entirely, unambiguously, part of my private lot, her authority. As defined by the CC&Rs, she loved to quote, ended where my property began. Her entire case against me was built on a lie of omission. I took a high-resolution photo of the map with my phone, the key that would unlock my defense. With the evidence of the financial misconduct and the proof from the plat map, I felt a surge of confidence. I had a plan. The annual HOA meeting was in 2 weeks. It was the one time all year that homeowners had a legal right to address the board in an open forum. I would register for a 5-minute speaking slot. I would lay out my evidence, not in an angry tirade, but in a calm, methodical presentation. I would expose her. I called Arthur and told him what I'd found. He was quiet for a moment. You have her on the contract. Daniel. That's a clear conflict of interest. And, if she didn't disclose it, it's a breach of her fiduciary duty. But be careful. You're going to walk into that meeting and accuse the president of fraud in front of the entire community. She will not go down quietly. Then I went to see Mr. Patel. I felt I owed him a warning, and I hoped he might stand with me. I found him loading supplies into his car. I explained my plan for the annual meeting, showing him the landscaping contract and a picture of the plat map. I told him I was going to expose her. The color drained from his face. Mr. Walker, please, he whispered, his eyes wide with fear. You cannot. If you do this, she will be ruined. Yes, but she will destroy me first. She will find a way. My business, my family. I have just paid the last of the fines. I am finally clear. If you anger her like this, she will come after me with everything she has. Please, just pay the fine. Let it go. His plea hit me harder than the lien notice. My crusade for justice could have real, devastating consequences for the very people I wanted to help. The fear in his eyes was a testament to the effectiveness of Karen's tyranny. He was a man so thoroughly terrorized that he would rather live quietly under oppression than risk the fallout of fighting back. I walked home, the weight of his fear settling on my shoulders. I now faced a moral choice. Was my personal victory worth the potential ruin of a good man? Was it my right to burn down the whole system if it meant innocent people would get caught in the fire? The path forward was no longer a clear, straight line. It was a dark and tangled wood, and for the first time, I wasn't sure I could find my way through. The night of the annual meeting. The community clubhouse was packed. The air was thick with a mixture of resentment, curiosity, and the cloying scent of cheap air freshener. Most years, this meeting drew a dozen retirees. Tonight, nearly 100 homeowners sat in flimsy folding chairs, a silent army drawn by whispers of the ongoing battle between Karen Lawson and the man from Rosewood Lane. I sat in the back with Heather, my notes clutched in a sweating palm, on a small table near the entrance. A sign-up sheet for the homeowner forum had my name listed, Daniel Walker. 5 minutes. A digital timer was set up on a projector screen, a silent, looming countdown. Karen and her board sat at a raised table at the front of the room, looking out over the crowd with strained smiles. Karen began the meeting with a series of bland announcements, her voice a smooth, practiced monotone. She presented the budget, the same summarized version she'd sent me, and glossed over the $120,000 landscaping expense without a flicker of hesitation. When she finished, she cleared her throat. "Before we move on to the open forum," she said, her eyes scanning the crowd and landing on Mr. Patel, who was sitting near the front, The board must address a new and pressing violation. Mr. Patel, it has come to our attention that the no soliciting sign on your front door is not from the association's approved list of signage. It is, therefore, an unauthorized modification. A collective murmur went through the room. The cruelty was breathtaking. She was making a public example of him, a preemptive strike to intimidate anyone else who might consider speaking out. Mr. Patel, his face ashen, rose slowly to his feet. Mrs. Lawson, it is just a small sign. The rules are the rules. Mr. Patel, Karen said, her voice dripping with false sympathy. A fine of $100 will be levied. Please ensure the sign is removed by Friday. She looked directly at me, a triumphant smirk on her face. Her message was clear. This is what happens to people who cross me. My blood ran cold. This was the moment. My choice. I could use my 5 minutes to present my meticulously prepared case, to win my own battle and expose her crimes. Or I could use that time to defend this good man from a vicious, public humiliation. Looking at Mr. Patel's trembling form, I knew there was no choice at all. And now, Karen announced, we will begin the homeowner forum. First up is Daniel Walker. I walked to the podium and placed my folder on its slanted surface. The timer on the screen started 5-0. Good evening, I began, my voice steady. My name is Daniel Walker, and I live at 1214 Rosewood Lane. I had originally planned to discuss the matter of the fines against my vehicle. However, I can no longer remain silent about the board's pattern of harassment against its residents, most recently demonstrated by the public shaming of my neighbor, Mr. Patel, over a no soliciting sign. Karen's smile vanished. Mr. Walker, this is not the proper venue. According to the bylaws, I interrupted, holding up the binder. This forum is for any matter of concern to homeowners, and I am deeply concerned. I turned to the audience. I am concerned that our board is levying fines, not to uphold our community standards, but as a tool of intimidation and retaliation. The timer clicked to 4-0. Let's talk about the rule Mr. Patel just violated. The rule about signs. I'm sure it's buried somewhere deep in our governing documents. But let's also talk about another sign. I clicked a button on my laptop, and the projector screen behind Karen changed. It now showed a crisp photo of the sign at the entrance to our subdivision. Oakwood Preserve, a community managed by Apex Community Management. This sign, I said, pointing, is in a common area. It advertises a for-profit corporation, by the board's own logic. Isn't this a violation of the rules against commercial signage? A wave of confused whispers rippled through the crowd. The timer hit 3-0. Now, about my truck. The board has fined me thousands of dollars, claiming my driveway is in view of the street, and therefore subject to their rules. But that is a carefully worded deception. I clicked again. The projector now displayed the high-resolution photo of the county plat map. I used a laser pointer to trace the lines of my lot. This is the official plat map for my property, Lot 118. As you can all see, my property line extends to the curb. My driveway is 100% private property. The HOA has as much authority to regulate what I park there as they do to regulate the color of my sofa. The whispers grew louder. People were leaning forward in their chairs. Karen's face was a mask of cold fury. The timer showed 2-0. The board insists on a strict, literal interpretation of the CC&Rs. So, let's be strict. I'd like to draw your attention to Article 8, Section 8.4.2, the very rule they are using against me. I clicked again, and the text of the rule appeared on screen, the words I had highlighted weeks ago. It prohibits commercial vehicles on any lot where they are visible from the street or any common area. My driveway is not a common area. So, is it visible from one? I showed a series of photos taken from the sidewalk, the street, and the green space across from my house. In every one, the small logo on my truck door was unreadable, a black smudge, from any common area. The logo is not legible. Therefore, no violation has occurred, even under their own twisted interpretation. The timer hit 1 hour. The room was silent. Which brings me to the final question. Why? Why this aggressive enforcement of vague rules? Why the selective harassment? Perhaps it's a simple desire for power. Or perhaps it's to distract us from looking too closely at how our money is being spent. I clicked one last time. On one side of the screen was the redacted page from the meeting minutes. The section on vendor contracts completely blacked out. On the other side was the unredacted landscaping contract I had obtained. I highlighted the name of the vendor, Lawson Landscape and Design, and the signature of the owner, Martin Lawson. This year, we are paying $120,000 for landscaping to a company owned by our president's brother-in-law. That is a clear conflict of interest that, to my knowledge, was never disclosed to the homeowners. This information was deliberately hidden from us. I looked from the screen to the stunned faces in the crowd, then to Karen, whose face was chalk white. The timer on the screen read 0:15. I stepped back from the podium. I have one simple question for the board. Why was this information hidden from us? The timer beeped, flashing 000. I yielded my time and walked back to my seat, leaving the question hanging in the dead, silent air of the room. The silence lasted for what felt like an eternity. Then, from the back of the room, Arthur Vance's voice cut through the tension. "I'd like to make a motion," he said. Standing up, I move for an immediate, independent forensic audit of the association's finances for the last 3 years. "Second," a woman shouted from the front. Karen, visibly shaken, banged her pen on the table. "That motion is out of order." But the dam had broken. Another homeowner stood up. I call for a vote of no confidence in the board president. Second came a chorus of voices. The room erupted. People were on their feet, shouting, sharing their own stories of Karen's fines and intimidation. Mr. Patel was standing, his face no longer filled with fear, but with a dawning sense of hope. The management company representative was frantically trying to restore order, but it was useless. The authority of the board, so absolute just minutes before, had completely evaporated. It was a resident-led coup, born of years of pent-up frustration and ignited by 5 minutes of simple, documented truth. Heather put her hand on my arm, her eyes shining with pride. We watched as the community took back control, their voices united for the first time. The house of cards Karen Lawson had so carefully constructed had just come tumbling down. In the weeks that followed, the old order was dismantled with surprising speed. A special meeting was called, and the vote of no confidence passed with a near-unanimous majority. Karen Lawson and her 2 board members were officially recalled. An interim board was appointed, with Arthur Vance as the acting president, tasked with overseeing the independent audit I had called for. The audit was a bloodbath. It confirmed everything I had suspected and more. It uncovered not only the grossly inflated landscaping contract, but also a kickback scheme involving the pool maintenance company and an insurance broker who was a cousin of the board's treasurer. The auditors estimated that over the course of Karen's 3-year presidency, more than $250,000 had been funneled to businesses owned by her friends and family. The findings were turned over to the county sheriff's office. Heather, recusing herself from the investigation to avoid any conflict of interest, handed the case file to her most trusted captain. Warrants were issued. The local news, tipped off by a homeowner, had a field day. They ran a story with the headline, "Suburban Dream. HOA Nightmare President Accused of Embezzlement." A new board was elected, this time with a full slate of reform-minded candidates, including a relieved and newly empowered Mr. Patel. Their first official act was to vote to void all outstanding fines levied under Karen's tenure and to fire Apex Community Management. The lien on our house vanished as if it had never existed. The check I received in the mail, refunding the initial fine I'd foolishly paid on a previous lawn violation, was the sweetest $200 I'd ever held. Life in Oakwood Preserve began to return to a new, more relaxed normal. The oppressive sense of being constantly watched slowly dissipated. Neighbors started talking to each other again, not in hushed whispers about the HOA, but about their kids, their gardens, and the upcoming block party. One evening, a few months later, Arthur stopped by. He was carrying a box of old records from the clubhouse storage room. "Just cleaning things out," he said, setting the box on our porch. "Thought you might find this interesting." He pulled out a dusty binder labeled Board Minutes, 2018. He flipped to a page he had marked with a sticky note. "I was trying to figure out when Karen's hostility really started. It always seems so personal with you, Daniel. More than just the money." He pointed to an entry under New Business. It was a record of bids for the annual municipal vehicle maintenance contract. The town council often consulted with local communities on preferred vendors. There were 3 bids listed. One was from a large regional fleet service. The second was from Lawson Landscape and Design, which apparently had a small engine repair division. The third was from a small, independent garage that had just opened in town Walker's Auto Repair. A note at the bottom indicated that the board had recommended my business to the town based on price and qualifications. I had won the contract, a contract that had helped me get my business off the ground. I stared at the page, the final piece of the puzzle falling into place. "She saw you as a rival from the very beginning," Arthur said softly. "You took a contract her brother-in-law was counting on. When you moved into her neighborhood, into her kingdom, it wasn't just about your truck. It was about an old grudge. The truck was just the excuse she had been waiting 5 years to use. It was the final, clarifying revelation. The whole ordeal, the stress, the threats, the sleepless nights, hadn't been born from a random power trip. It was the result of a long-simmering, deeply personal vendetta. My only crime had been being better at my job than her family." I closed the binder and looked out at the quiet street, at the houses where lights were beginning to glow in the dusk. The community felt safe now, not because of restrictive rules and meticulous enforcement, but because its people were finally in charge of it themselves. My wife and I had faced down a tyrant, not with threats or force, but with patience, procedure, and the simple, unshakable power of the truth. We had fixed what was broken,